So I'd like to invite everyone to take their seats. There's a few different tables. Everyone can grab a chair and sit down. Peso. Okay, I think I'm going to start. There are probably going to be a couple more people coming in and trickling in, but that's how things go. I just want to welcome everybody to today's program. I want to welcome all the people who made it down here today, as well as the people who I cannot see and that are here with us virtually. It's really special to have everyone gathered together, especially in this year. This year is considered a special year. The Lubavitcher Rebbe said that this year is the year of Hakel, the year of gathering. So it's a very, very good time to gather and to strengthen our Judaism and to learn different topics and to start the conversation on a topic that is really, really close to my heart, and I'm sure close to the hearts of some of you here. I just want to, firstly, I want to introduce myself. Most of you know who I am, and my name is Chani Shiner. I'm from Boulder Center for Judaism. Rabbi Shiner in the back is my husband. I'd also like to do a special thank you. I don't know if they hear it out here, but Nancy Lipsy and Sophia, who are sitting in the front. The JCC, Boulder JCC, is a great partner for this program, and we love working with them. Additionally, I'd like to do a shout out to Rebecca Steele from Crist, that's right over there. And Mike Greenwood from Greenwood Myers, and he's right there. If you want to raise your hand, okay. And I also want to thank the Barron Foundation for helping also to underwrite this vital program. So a number of years ago, my husband and I were fortunate enough to go to Belarus. I know now some of you might feel like it's a dirty word, but hey, we decided to go there since my father grew up in Belarus, in fact, in a little city called Glubaka. And we traveled there to go, and we thought maybe, this was after my father had passed away, and at that point I was like thinking, oh, I really want to find out more about my father's family and like connect a little more, since my father was not around anymore. And we went there hoping that maybe we'll even see my father's home where he had lived. We had seen pictures of it, really big, nice home in standards, Glubakan standards, and also to possibly to find my grandparents' grave. And we had the address of where they lived, and we went and we looked and we looked, and we also noticed that the place didn't really change. I was thinking at that point that my father would have felt very comfortable. He would not have any culture shock from when he left to when I came, because nothing seemed to change. Still, I don't know if there was running water. There was probably running water, but there really wasn't much else in the way of extra modernization. Maybe a little more. And of course, unfortunately, I did not find the house where he grew up. And I found the grave of my grandparents and in a separate grave of my aunts and uncle. I had 2 aunts and I think 1 uncle. And unfortunately, it was a mass grave. And as I was praying at this grave, I got very emotional, and I was thinking that my grandparents never had the good fortune to celebrate 20 years of marriage to each other. In fact, they didn't even, before they died, they didn't have any children who were married at that point. And I was thinking, I was very emotional, and I was thinking about the whole branch of the family that survived and flourished and is flourishing to this day. So over the years, I've matured and I've thought a lot about this topic, about life, and I've become much more passionate about the subject of Jewish burial, a gift that my grandparents were never afforded. I know that this topic is not very comfortable for me, for most of us, but I have noticed how much chaos it brings into people's lives if one leaves this monumental decision, one of the life's most important decisions, to leave it to the end of one's life and to a time of great trauma and chaos. So most of us try to cross our T's, we try to live responsibly, and we think about decisions that affect our day-to-day life. And it's never too early to put our fears in order. In fact, in Jewish tradition, it encourages us to make these plans, and it also says that it's a special segula, that's a Hebrew word, for a special blessing for long life. So I would just like to share a personal story that happened a few months ago. I met Charlotte Galciano 20 years ago when her brother Steve came with his family from Ketchikan, Alaska. He came to visit his in-laws who lived across the street from us in Fraser Meadows. And I like people, and I got to know Charlotte, and I liked her. And over the years, every couple of years, I would reach out to her. Even after her in-laws died, and not her in-laws, it wasn't her brother's in-laws, so her brother was stopped coming to Boulder, I would keep up, just, how are you, stuff like that. Unfortunately, during COVID, Charlotte realized that she had cancer, and she had a very severe cancer of, I think, the throat. And it was very advanced, unfortunately. And at that point, she was doing some soul searching and trying to figure out, like, hey, I'm in a crisis, and who do I call? She lived in Parker. She really wasn't involved in the Jewish community. She, in fact, had been married. She was married to someone who wasn't Jewish. And they traveled a lot, and they were busy with their family. And suddenly she realized, hey, I really think I need something. I need to put my life in order. I just need some help, someone who cares. And for some reason, the person that she remembered fondly as a friend was me. So we got back in touch, and we reconnected. At that time, I tried to visit her, and I brought her some homemade food because she was barely eating. And I just cared. This has nothing to do with Jewish, any ulterior motive. I was a friend, and I was there for her, and I really cared and tried to strengthen her. And she was really putting up a fight. At that point, we had discussions if she made any plans, and she said, no, I'm all taken care of. I have my plans. We're planning to cremate, whatever. And I left it, because that's not something that I was, I said, do you want to hear what Judaism thinks? So she said, okay, I'll listen. I did tell her, but I left it. It wasn't, it was her decision. After a while, at a certain point, when it was getting closer and she realized that this was a more serious thing, she started thinking through all her decisions, and she decided that she wanted a place that her children and her grandchildren could come and connect to her, and that it was something physical. And she changed. She ended up deciding to change her plan. Why do I bring this story here? Is I feel like we all do our best in our life. We try to do good deeds. We try to help other people. We try to eat healthy. We try to help the environment. And we connect Jewishly. But this topic today, if we can look into, think about it, soul search, and even start the discussion, so we can make, this is something that's going to affect us forevermore. And it's definitely behooves us to start the discussion, listen to what Doron says, even have discussion amongst ourselves, and see what we want to do from there. So at this time, I'd like to welcome our speaker, Doron Kornbluth, who has done extensive research on this topic, and he's a noted author and a speaker, and he has flown here from Israel to join the conversation.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. How are you? Nice to be here with you. Can you hear me okay? Time good? I can't hear from the people online. Hi, virtual people. Give me a thumbs up. I can't see you either, but that's good. So it's nice to be here. Pleasure to be here in Boulder. The view is just amazing. As I'm speaking, you can see the mountains. Wow, you're very fortunate to be here. A little bit about me. My name is Doron Kornbluth. I grew up in Montreal, Canada. After university, I made Aliyah, and I've been in Israel for roughly 30 years. Married, kids. My oldest just finished a 5-year stint in the Army. My youngest is going in pretty soon. And I never talked about this subject. I never cared about this subject. I was always uncomfortable with this subject. I've been an educator for many years, a number of decades actually, and my subjects, the things that I always focus on, have focused on and still focus on, are much more positive. I wrote a book called Raising Kids to Love Being Jewish, so I talk to Jewish families about how do you pass on, parents and grandparents, how do you pass on the identity to your descendants. I speak to college students. I spoke last night in Denver to college students. Tonight I speak to college students on why be Jewish and how to pass this on. I give a talk on happiness. It's like a very positive Jewish education. That's who I am, and that's what I've always done. And then about 10 years ago, maybe a little more, 12 years ago or so, I was in Florida on a speaking tour, and I open up a Jewish newspaper, and there's an ad from a Jewish funeral home offering Jewish cremations. And I'm a traditional Jewish boy from Montreal. I didn't know there was such a thing as a Jewish cremation. And I was sort of surprised, and I started just to look into it and to think about it. And about 3 years later, I got kind of really into it, did a lot of research for a number of years. I wrote a book on the subject, and since then I've been speaking about it. And interestingly, I get more and more requests to talk on this subject. Every year it's going up. There is a curiosity that people have, even though it is, as you said very beautifully, after it is an uncomfortable subject. I heard this story about this older Jewish guy calls his wife over, says, honey, please come sit with me on the bed. Kind of a strange request. So she sits with him on the bed, and he says, honey, remember when we were in our 20s and I broke my leg and you were there with me? Yes, honey, I was. And remember when we were in our 40s and I went bankrupt and you were there with me? Yes, honey, I was. And remember we were in our 50s and I had my heart attack and you were there with me? Yes, honey, I was. So he says, well, I have something important to tell you. So a tear rolls down her cheek. She leans in. He says, honey, you're bad luck. There are some subjects that just seem like they're bad luck. We don't want to deal with them. We don't want to talk about them. We want to think about them. Certainly at the top of the list, or near the top of the list, is death, burial, cremation. Who wants to deal with this stuff? And the truth is that most people don't want to deal with it, and it's not talked about a lot. Understandably, it's unpleasant. Right? Comedian once said, I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying. we don't like dealing, thinking, So, and to be honest, that's actually not necessarily so bad. When a Jew has a drink, what do we say? L'chaim, to life, right? We are very, very life-focused. I remember Rabbi Shiner, and Mr. Shiner, maybe you'll tell me what year it was. There was a terrorist act in the early 90s in New York where there were 4 Hasidic boys in a van that were attacked by Arab terrorists. One was killed. Ari Halberstam, I believe. And an amazing thing at the time, all the politicians, the non-Jewish mainstream politicians, city, state, and federal, went and made shiva calls, to the family and to the family of mourners, M-O-U-R, and of mourners. And they, one of them said, "You Jews are incredible. The world hits you, the world attacks you, and what do?" Because they were launching that evening a chesed fund, a kindness fund in the boy's name, right? Said, instead of revenge and instead of anger, you're building and you're doing kindness. And it's actually true. Our response is always about life. When Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, you may remember Bill Clinton was the president of the United States, went to Israel for the funeral, spoke at the funeral, and gave quite a moving eulogy, actually. I'm not sure who wrote it for him, but he gave a pretty moving eulogy. The last two words became a bumper sticker in Israel for many years. Shalom chaver, goodbye my friend. It was like a code, right? But he said in that eulogy, President Bill Clinton said that the Jewish prayer for the dead, there actually is no Jewish prayer for the dead. What was he referring to? Kaddish, the closest thing, I guess, right? Doesn't even refer to death. Yiskadal v'yiskadash, may his name be sanctified, be elevated. So we ourselves are not that into this subject. Focus on life, become a better person, become a little more spiritual person, help others, make this world a more spiritual place, that's what we're focused on. So the fact that people don't want to deal with it, and the fact that, it's not a comfortable subject, fair enough. To be honest, it never really made much of a difference, because throughout most of Jewish history, everybody just did what they did, right? There was no question of what to do with a dead body through most of Jewish history. Cremation is not a new idea. Cremation is the norm of Jewish history. It is the norm archaeologically. It is the norm under Greeks and the Romans and most of the places that we've lived. Roman historian Tacitus, when he described the Jews to his compatriots, and he gave just a few defining character traits, he said, the Jews bury rather than burn the dead. It stood out that we were the ones who buried. So things have changed. When most of us were kids, the percentage of Americans, forget about Jews, the percentage of Americans, there's 40 million Americans, something like that, percentage of cremation was under 10%. It was actually under 5% when I was a little kid. Right? Today, it's about 52, 53%. Most American deaths today, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, atheist, whatever, most American deaths today are followed by cremation. In 2017, it swung from a minority to a majority. Right? The Jewish community is not that high, but we're not that low either. I don't have a real stat. I don't think anybody has a real stat, but I will tell you the one stat that I do have. Rabbi Zone, who's the head of the Chevra Kadisha, the Burial Society in Queens, and kind of like the rabbi's rabbi on these matters, everybody calls him with their questions, what to do, end-of-life questions. So about 15 years ago, he did a study in the New York area of Jewish funeral homes, and it turned out that 25% of the requests were for cremation. Now, did anybody notice the variables and the way I described it? That was about 15 years ago. Things have changed. That was in the New York area, the most culturally Jewish part of the country, which affects everything, right? More Jews, more Jewish institutions, more temples, more synagogues, more Jewish life, more culture, more tradition. That's just the way things work, right? And that was people who chose a Jewish funeral home. Never mind the huge number of people who don't choose any funeral home, 1-800-IT, or choose a non-sectarian funeral home or whatever. Meaning, if it was 25% then, there, in those circumstances, there is no doubt today that 1/3 of the Jewish dead, and more likely, about 40% of the Jewish dead in America, are being cremated today. So, massive change, which is why I want to thank the Shiners, the JCC for hosting and partnering, everybody who was involved. Chabad of Boulder for making this happen, because it's an uncomfortable topic. I get it. But it's suddenly an important one. Because suddenly people are making decisions, big decisions, that throughout history we never really made. It was just automatic. And so now is a time for education. Now is a time for people to get more educated, to hear some of the Jewish attitudes and philosophies on the subject, and so that will help you make your own decisions. Interestingly, this has changed dramatically. Changed for the Western world, America, changed for Jews. But my question for you, why are more people today, 2023, choosing cremation? Forget about Jews, just talk about American citizens, right? Talk about the US for simplicity. It's gone up about 500% in our lifetimes, the rates of cremation. So why are people today of all types and backgrounds choosing cremation? You tell me, what have you thought about? What have you heard? What have your friends and family done? What are the reasons that cremation is suddenly so popular today compared to 50 years ago? Number one, cost. No question, we're going to talk about it in detail. Right? In general, cremation is much cheaper than burial. Why else? What else have you heard? Meaning less traditional people do less traditional things. It's a tautology, it's a circular, absolutely. Great. What else? Dispersed families. Actually, you guys are good. Wow, educated Boulder community, I'm impressed. Meaning, in the old country, so to speak, in the old country, you would have a family plot, generation after generation after generation. People would go and visit the grave, right? It was kind of like a beautiful thing, you know? Now, you get the grandparents in one city, you get the parents, kids in another city, the grandkids in another city. They're not so traditional anyway, so who knows if they're going to visit. They don't work. Florida has a very high cremation rate for many reasons. One of the reasons, so many retirees. So where am I going to be buried? Here in Florida, everybody I know is in an old age home, and they're going to be dead within 5-10 years anyway. Right? I've heard people say this. Right? I'm going to be buried back in New York. I haven't lived there for 20 years. I don't even remember people there. Where my kids are out west, but their kids are in college, and they're not going to be out. So there's no point, why? Families are all over the place, so why bother having a grave? Definitely. We're going to talk about all these. Why else?
Some people think the land will be
Excellent. That the land issues, meaning that we're running out of land, and why waste it on dead people? So that's an environmental critique. There's another environmental critique, by the way, which is that burial is bad for the environment. Never mind just the land space, but what happens in it. We're going to talk about it. So environmental issues are another category. Any other things that you want to discuss? Any things you've heard? There's one other thing. Yes?
My question is, why is burial bad for the environment?
Oh, we're going to talk about it. We're just starting. We're going to be here for 3-4 hours. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It's okay. No, we're going to talk about it. Right now, I'm just getting the headlines incorrect. There's one more reason that I've heard people say is that they don't want to be eaten up by the bugs. Have you heard this? It's kind of disgusting. They just want to get over and done with, So those are the main reasons that people today are choosing cremation. What I want to do right now is we're going to do 3 sections. I'm going to move quickly because I want to get to the third section, which is you. First section is I want to analyze the reasons you just listed, and the same reasons that I hear everywhere, and the same reason that you see in the literature, of why people today of all types, all backgrounds are choosing cremation. I'm very open and honest. There are some of those reasons that make sense. They are undeniable advantages. There are others that are completely, quote-unquote, fake news, misinformation, just based on a lack of knowledge. There's others that are somewhere in between. So we're going to analyze the reasons that people are choosing cremation, see what actually makes sense and what doesn't. We're then going to flip the script, so to speak, and we're going to try and understand why Jews for 3,000 years have focused so much on burial. And then we'll get to your questions and comments. You follow the idea? First, we're going to analyze the reasons people are choosing cremation, see which make sense, which don't. Then we're going to get into why have Jews for 3,000 years focused on burial. Then we'll get into questions and comments. Okay. The first thing you mentioned, it's always the first thing you mentioned, is money. Let's leave that for now. In no particular order, environmental issues. There are 2 major environmental critiques of American burials. Number 1, the use of land. And the idea is like this. The phrase that cremation companies use, they're companies, they sometimes call themselves societies. I don't know how they get away with that, to be honest, because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry run by basically one big conglomerate. So it's money, it's money. But they call themselves cremation societies. So they have this phrase. It's a very good phrase for marketing. The phrase is, land is for the living. Ever heard this phrase? Land is for the living. It's a very powerful moral argument, by the way, because it implies a certain choice. The idea is like this. We have a limited amount of land. We have an ever-growing population. We are, slowly but surely, running out of land. Therefore, why waste it on dead bodies that don't need it? Leave it to the birds and the trees and the playgrounds for the kids. And by the way, the reason it's such a powerful argument is because theoretically, if you had to choose between land is for the living and land is for the dead, what do Jews say when we have a drink? L'chaim. In other words, you would actually choose the living if you had to make a choice. So that's why it's a powerful argument. There's only one problem. I did the math. I'm not the first person to have done the math. I'm not the last. My book on the subject is called Cremation or Burial, A Jewish View. You can find it online if you want. Came out in 2012. Since that time, I've spoken to hundreds of audiences about the subject. I've never been called out once on the number. I'm going to share with you one statistic. I'm not going to belabor you with stats, but I'm going to share with you one statistic. I've never had anybody argue it in the book. I think it's inarguable. Goes like this. If every American who died, and I'm only speaking to the Jewish community, which is less than 2% of the United States population, right? But if every American who died, that's roughly 3 million deaths in the US every year, roughly, right? Thank God there's more births and there's immigration, so the population goes up. But there's about 3 million deaths a year in the USA. If every American who died were to be buried, get this, it would take 10,000 years to use up 1% of America's land mass. 10,000 years to use up 1% of the land in America. And you and I both know that few, if any, of those cemeteries would last the 10,000 years anyway. The point being, there is plenty of land in America. If you want to be buried in Manhattan or in downtown San Francisco or LA or any downtown, you're right, there's no land. Land is expensive. But how often do you go to a cemetery anyway? Within 1 hour of every metropolitan area, there is plenty of land. If you want the stats, you want the research, you can look it up in my book, but I'll give you a very simple way. The next time you fly, now that COVID's over, hopefully, and we can fly again, when the plane takes off, look down. It's an empty country. It's unbelievable. Environmental groups never talk about land is for the living because it's not an issue at all. There's other critiques we're going to talk about. By the way, this is true in North America, in South America, it's true in Europe, it's true in Africa, it's true in Asia, it's true in Australia. There's only 3 places, to my knowledge, that actually do have a legitimate land issue: Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan. Right? By the way, there are solutions in each of those places. It's not our subject, but land is not an issue whatsoever. There's plenty of land. We use far more land every year to build new big box stores, Walmarts and Macy's. I'm not sure what you're referring to, but just wait. We're going to get to questions and comments at the end, sir, okay? So there's plenty of land all over. It is not an issue. The real environmental critique, right? Because we're going in what we talked about, what you listed before as the issues of people are choosing cremation. The real environmental critique of American burial is not about the amount of land. It's not a problem. It's what goes into the land. 2 main problems. See if you notice the commonality of these 2 issues. Issue number 1, metal caskets. A legitimate burial disaster, environmental disaster burial. We are talking about 1 million, roughly, metal caskets a year. You have to forge the metal, the whole thing, put into the ground, rusting for 1,000 years. Terrible, legitimately terrible for the environment. I'm very outdoorsy. I'm actually, my side job, now I'm a little too busy to do it, but I'm actually a licensed tour guide in Israel. I love hiking. I love the outdoors. It means a lot to me, right? So the fact of what these metal caskets are doing to the environment, 1 million a year, is unbelievable how bad it is. Second environmental critique of American burial, embalming. For those who don't know what it is, consider yourselves lucky. I won't get too graphic, but just because we have to be on the same page. Embalming is when the blood, the liquids, basically the blood of the body is removed. It is replaced with preservatives. Number one choice still today is formaldehyde. Number one choice by far. What's the goal? The body still will decompose. It just takes longer. So in the non-Jewish traditions of viewing, right, that's a very big deal. And people just like the idea of slowing things down. 6 to 8 gallons of toxic chemicals per burial seeping into the body and then into the ground. Legitimate disaster. In no other industry would you let people put so much toxic chemicals into the ground on a regular basis, right? So these two issues, by far the two big environmental issues and critiques of burial, are real problems. Anybody notice anything they have in common? What do metal caskets and embalming have in common? Excellent. They are not Jewish. We don't do either. Judaism encourages, actually requires, wood caskets, ideally a simple wood casket. Some people go for the mahogany, whatever, but it's supposed to be humble and simple. By the way, I live in Israel. I grew up in Montreal, but I live in Israel. Do you know in Israel, they don't even bury in caskets? It's weird the first time you see it. They carry the body to the grave in a casket, in a coffin, a wood coffin. They then take it out and put it into the ground directly, burial shrouds, a talit, and they actually reuse the caskets. It's kind of strange at first. I think it's actually kind of nice. but in many places in America, sometimes municipal law, sometimes just expectation, you have to do a casket. Very often you don't actually, but technically, but that's the norm. But we don't do metal caskets. We're not supposed to, right? What about embalming? Judaism is completely against embalming, right? Embalming, by the way, is done far more in the US than any other country on the planet. It started in the Civil War because you had so many northern soldiers that were killed in the South, and the parents wanted to do the viewing, the Christian viewing, and see the bodies, so they would embalm in the South and send them up on the trains. That became the norm 150 years ago, whatever. And it's existed for thousands of years in different, the pharaohs, the mummies, were kind of an embalming in a different way, right? So Judaism is completely against embalming. And if you'd like to know why, and if you're a bit of a masochist, go onto YouTube after the talk and watch an embalming. And you will understand in about 30 seconds why Judaism considers it a desecration of the body. A completely unnecessary it's just not, we respect the human body. Jewish, non-Jewish, we don't take the liquids out. So Jewish burial has always been considered an environmental model, actually. Environmentalists are not in favor of cremation. It is simply not true. They are in favor of what is called green burial. Cremation itself has terrible environmental impact. We are all getting rid of our cars to get hybrids or e-vehicles, right, to stop using fossil fuels. Crematoriums are powered by fossil fuels, a tremendous amount of energy on each one. I used to think that a cremation took 5 minutes, like a microwave oven, right? And then I got into this subject when I was researching. Typical cremation, if you're a thin person, is roughly 2 hours. If you're a little bit like me and you're not quite thin, typical American, you're a little bit overweight, 2 to 3 hours. Obese people, 1/3 of America, 3 to 4 hours. It's a lot of energy. Furthermore, crematoriums release chemicals into the air. In our age group, and people who are middle-aged or older, if you have a filling, you might have mercury in your tooth. They don't do it anymore. Like now, the younger people getting fillings, it's usually not mercury. Mercury is terrible to release into the environment, like one of the worst. Many municipalities have a rule that you can't have a crematorium, a cremation oven, right beside a school. Ask yourself why. During COVID, actually, in the first 6 months of COVID, the Los Angeles Times had an article that the Los Angeles City Council had a very big vote that normally the Los Angeles rules of municipal Greater Los Angeles is a rule as to how many cremations a crematorium can do a day. Because of it's an air pollution rule. It's under their air pollution guidelines. But because, unfortunately, there were so many people dying, extra deaths, they temporarily lifted the rules to allow extra air pollution because people didn't have a choice. They had to cremate the bodies. There were so many people dying. In other words, yes, there is a problem with American burial, environmental problem. The solution, no metal caskets, no embalming, definitely no cremation. Environmental groups are not in favor of cremation, uses energy, releases chemicals. Jewish burial is a model, right? There's also how you design the cemetery. There's a lot of things, some are better, some are worse, that we're like anybody else and actually better in some ways. So the point is, environmental reasons, it's simply not true. Cremation is not better, it's actually worse. You mentioned before about families being dispersed, right? And so why bother having a grave if no one's going to visit it, right? Florida, Colorado, in Chicago. So I want to test your Jewish knowledge. Well, I'll test your knowledge of Israel. I assume most or all of you have been to Israel. True or false, give me a thumbs up if it's true, or a thumbs down if it's false. The #1 visited site, tourist site in the state of Israel today, the #1 visited site is the grave of Moses. The Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, lawgiver from the Torah. Is it true it's the #1 visited site, or is it false? Everybody's saying false. Okay, good. You're right. There's 2 ways. Well, really 3 ways that you probably know that it's false. #1, you've been to Israel, never heard of the thing before. You would have, right? Western Wall is the #1. Masada is #2. Actually, no, Yad Vashem is #2. Masada is #3. But more importantly, the reason that it's not the most visited site in Israel is because it's not in Israel. If you remember the end of the Bible, the end of the Torah, Moses, never makes it into the land of Israel. Fascinating as to why. Simply reading the verses, he hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock. The commentators explain it's much more complicated and deeper than that because at another time he did hit the rock. For whatever reason, he was not allowed into the land of Israel. Martin Luther King Jr.'s final speech when he says, I may not get there, but I have gone up the mountain, I have looked into the promised land. Martin Luther King Jr., Christian pastor, was directly quoting the sequence of Moses at the end of the Torah. Right? So the first reason that it's not true, that people don't visit the site of Moshe in Israel, because it's not in Israel. The second reason is we don't even know where it is. The Torah makes it clear. The place of Moses' grave, burial, was hidden. Why? Simple understanding. He was such a great prophet that it could have become kind of an idol worship. So now ask yourself the question. Has anyone in human history, in the 3,000 years, roughly, since Moses lived, has anyone ever visited the grave of Moses? And the answer is not knowingly, never, not once. What that brings out is an amazing new understanding. We, in our modern minds, we connect 2 things. Reasonably, it's not an unreasonable connection. Right? And it seems to make sense at first. We connect having a grave and visiting a grave. And the reason why you have a grave is so people can visit the grave. And therefore, if nobody's going to visit the grave, because the kids aren't so traditional anymore, they're not comfortable with it, they live far away, then why bother having one? And many people, that's their prime motivation. What the Moses example tells us, I think it's the second most famous burial in the Torah, in Judaism, right? Abraham burying Sarah at the beginning of the Bible of the Torah, and then God burying Moses at the end. Is that it has nothing to do with visiting a grave. These 2 things, visiting and having a grave, are unrelated. Maybe you like visiting a grave. I actually do. I get something from it. I don't go every day. I'm not a weirdo, don't worry. But I connect occasionally to visiting grave, my ancestors, my father, my ancestors, famous rabbis and rebbitzins, whatever, you can or you don't have to. There's no obligation in Jewish law to visit graves. But that has nothing to do with whether or not the body, the soul, needs a grave. The Moses example proves it. There was plenty of cremation 3,000 years ago. The archaeological record is very clear. The norm at the time was cremation. And yet God did not choose to cremate Moses. Did not do what the Vikings would later do, put the body on a raft, set it aflame down the river. Did not do what the Tibetans do, put it on a tower, let the vultures eat it, sky burial. There's a million different ways that people have dealt with the dead bodies over the years. He buried Moses because whether or not a grave will be visited, as we were going to learn, the person deserves a burial. Moses proves it. By the way, interesting that that this idea of not having. It's surprising how often you have a grandkid or a great-grandkid or a cousin or a nephew who gets into Jewish genealogy or gets a little more traditional and they want to visit the grave. I hear stories like this all the time. So I don't know if we really know nobody's going to visit the grave, but even if nobody visits a grave, it still has its own intrinsic value. The mobility argument, which is the flip side of what you said, meaning I don't want to have a grave because nobody will visit it, so better that I put it into an urn and the kids can take it with you. They take it with them, right? So think of it this way. First generation, how many urns are they going to have? 2, father and mother. Next generation, how many urns are they going to have? 4. Next generation, 8. My point is, you can keep going, 1632. And it's a bit of a facetious, but the point is, our lives and our homes are not meant for the long-term respectful care of cremated remains. By the way, tell me if this is true here in Colorado. Every funeral home that I know of has a problem with unclaimed cremated remains. I've never met a funeral home that doesn't have that problem. Meaning, unclaimed cremated remains. Meaning people, it's a cheaper thing, so people order the cremation, right? But they're not, we think that but many people are not comfortable with the cremated remains. And the funeral home has a real problem because legally they can get rid of the cremated remains, but morally they know that 5 years from now somebody's going to come back and say, "What'd you do with grandma?" So either they're stuck with them. In California, there's a rule of 30 days they have to send them to a central place. I don't know in Colorado if it's the same thing. So the point is that people are uncomfortable. Like the idea that we're going to take it with you. If you want like something to connect you to your loved one. I mean, Jews have been very connected to their loved ones for thousands of years. We never had to take the cremated remains with us. You get the idea? Like it's a beautiful thing. It's a piece of clothing. It's a piece of jewelry. It's a picture. There's a lot of ways. It's very important to be connected. Okay, next reasons. We're moving quickly because I want to flip the script in a second and get into the Jewish reasons. We talked about the environment, talked about mobility. The idea that it's disgusting to be eaten by worms, by bugs. People are kind of. So I want to be honest. What I call discomfort with decomposition. That's one of the reasons. I remember high school labs. I don't know if you do. And decomposition is disgusting. I am not going to sit here and tell you that what happens underground is pleasant. But I will tell you that what happens in a crematorium is no more pleasant. We don't see it. It's closed off behind the wall. But this is a process that takes a few hours. Forgive me for saying this, but it's important if you're going to be making your own decisions to understand. During those 2, 3, 4 hours, the body is not still and calm and spiritual. The muscles are contracting and expanding. The brain is sizzling. It is a loud, smelly process. It is awful. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that burial is better. They're both kind of gross when you think about it. But get this, because when I realized this idea that I'm going to share with you now, when I realized this idea, it changed my entire perspective on the subject. They're both kind of gross, burial and cremation. But get this, burial is the natural way of every living thing. Just think about it for a second. A plant grows in the forest, blossoms, goes back to Mother Earth. An animal is born, runs around the forest, lays down to die, goes back to Mother Earth. Burial is the norm of nature. Burial is natural. Cremation is artificial and violent. Wow. So they're both kind of gross. So the other thing you mentioned, I believe, was that less traditional people do less traditional things, which is true. There's no question. It's tautological. It feeds on itself. Right? It's the same idea. I just have this thought, take it or leave it, that when you're dealing with big questions, your final question, Am I just going to do something because other people are doing it, or am I going to look into it myself and make an educated decision? My kids, I have 5 teenagers, guys. Come on, give me some love. Come on. So my kids are always bothering me about my ties. Right? Today I'm wearing one. I know Colorado's kind of loose, so I took off my jacket and it's so formal. But I have these ties, and I always get mixed up, like if the ties are too thin or the ties are too wide. And my kids want me to get rid of the ties, right? And what's my answer? My answer is, listen, you and I both know that in 5 years, these are going to be back in style. They just go in and go out and go in and go out and go in and go out, right? Changes them. And these are really nice, good silk ties. I'm not getting rid of them. Still back in my closet. The point is, like, on big decisions, you don't just like follow the fad or what people are doing or a little less traditional now. Like, think about it, look into it. That's what we're doing here together. So when it gets down to it, ladies and gentlemen, when you analyze the reasons that people today, Americans of all types, are making this decision, burial versus cremation, the reasons that people are choosing cremation are, for the most part, extremely weak or false. Just think about what we just did in the last 15 minutes. It's not good for the environment, doesn't solve mobility problems, nothing to do with, they all fall apart when you look into them, except one. There is one reason for cremation that is a major advantage, and it is undeniable. What is that reason? It's a lot cheaper. Usually between $5,000 and $10,000 cheaper. By the way, COVID taught us that you could do very cheap burials. My father passed away 2 years ago during COVID, not because of COVID, but during COVID. We were not allowed to do any funeral services, not outside. It was all outside. So much cheaper than a normal kind of a thing. But the way most people, what's normal for most people, what we're comfortable with, a typical cremation will end up costing maximum $2,000, $3,000. You can do a very expensive cremation if you want to. It can get up into 5 digits, no. But most cremations, that's what it is. Most burials, 8, 10, 12, when you add everything up, the plot, the headstone, the service. I mean, it's, so for, again, rarely is it less than a $5,000 difference. Usually it's more like 8, 10, whatever. Tell me if I don't know, Colorado, that's the norm in the United States. I assume it's about the same here. So the real question now is, why is it worth the extra money? Because Judaism, Jews are claiming, yes, true, your reasons for cremation don't make sense, but why spend the extra cash? And that's what I want to focus on now. I'm going to move quickly, share some headlines. We'll then get to your questions and comments. Anything you want more detail on, we can go into, and we can discuss. So like this. The Jews believe, and have believed for thousands of years, that some things are worth extra effort and extra money. I'll give you a very simple example, okay? Just a human example. Gentlemen, when you proposed to your beloved and you gave her a wedding ring, I assume that you did not give it to her out of a Cracker Jack box. Right? There's some things we spend more money on. We know it's more appropriate. The meaning, the symbolism, you don't go cheap on certain things. I want to make a case. I'm going to try and express, I think, the Jewish case for why this is worth the extra money. Number one, in the ghetto in the Holocaust, in World War II, the Lodz ghetto, I believe, there was a rabbi named Rabbi Ephraim Oshry. He actually survived the war, and he moved to New York, and he told the following story. He said one day he's in his little room in the ghetto, and a Nazi SS officer barges in, slams the door. Rabbi Oshry thinks he's about to meet his maker. Instead, the Nazi officer starts speaking to him in perfect Yiddish. Rabbi, I'm a Jew. I have fake papers. I look the part. I move around a lot, right? So this is how I'm surviving. But I have a question, because I'm a very sick man. I only have a few weeks to live, the doctors say. And I know what they're going to do to my body. They're going to bury me in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross over my body, surrounded by other Nazis. Rabbi, for a few months to survive, to run around, I've been able to do this. But I can't spend eternity in a Nazi Christian cemetery with crosses. I just can't do it. Can I be cremated to avoid that fate? Rabbi Oshry, older man, took the Jew's hand, rubbed him warmly, and said, "My dear child, no, you can't. What they do to us we have no control over, and God will have to take care of it. But a Jewish person must do everything they can to give themselves and other Jews proper Jewish burial. In a normal time, that means the Chevra Kadisha, the Burial Society, by the way, it's the only organization I know of in all of Jewish history called the Holy Society. It's not called the Burial Society, it's Chevra Kadisha. Right? In normal time, it means they're going to prepare the body. It's going to be in a Jewish cemetery. There's going to be the prayers said. The Kaddish will be said. A little bit of the earth from the land of Israel is sprinkled on the grave. Right? So every Jew has a connection to the land of Israel. But, Rabbi Oshry said, even in this terrible time, this hell on earth, a Jew must do whatever they can to avoid cremation. It's better to even be buried in a Nazi cemetery with a Nazi cross, as hard it is for us to understand. And by the way, he went on to explain to this young man, the German soldier, German soldier guy, where it is in Judaism. Meaning that this is not bagels and lox. I love bagels and lox. I grew up on bagels and lox. Nothing against. But we do realize that like Sephardic Jews, Yemenite Jews, Ethiopian Jews never heard of bagels and lox, right? This is not a core Jewish thing. It's a little nice cultural thing, right? Burial is not. Burial is actually remarkably important in our religion. Abraham is buried, Sarah is buried, Rachel is buried. The Torah itself gives so little ink to big things. The rules of Shabbat, Yom Kippur, small sections, right? And yet so much ink is used on burial. By the way, it's actually a direct commandment. The end of Deuteronomy chapter 21 outlines the mitzvah, the obligation to bury the dead. To the point that if you have a new Jewish community being formed, let's say there's a new town somewhere being formed and Jews are moving and making a community. What are the top things that community has to do Jewishly? What are its priorities? You make a school for kids, Jewish school for kids. You make a mikveh, ritual bath, and the Chevra Kadisha, the cemetery. Before buying a Sefer Torah or a synagogue. And that's how important this is. So that's the first reason that Jews for 3,000 years have focused on burial, because it is a core part of our tradition, our religion. Surprisingly important. Number two, not just our religion. If you were to make two maps of the world, a map of monotheism, where people believe in one God, versus, I guess it would be like polytheists, belief in many gods, or atheists, belief in no God, right? A monotheism map, and a burial map, meaning where people bury more than cremate. And you were to take these two maps, the monotheism map, the belief in God, one God map, and the burial map, and you were to superimpose them, they are very close to each other. Exceptions to every rule, but just think about it. India, polytheistic, cremation is the norm, right? The Middle East, Islam, very monotheistic, they got it from us. There's no cremation in Islamic countries. There's not one crematorium in Islamic countries, they're not allowed, right? They got it from us, Israel. Israel, 9 million people, there's one cremation oven, that's all there is, right? It's growing a little bit because of movies and television, but it's we're talking 2% of the population. Monotheistic attitude, belief in one God, traditional. Europe. So until World War II, roughly, cremation was a minor occurrence in Europe. The Catholic Church in Europe outlawed cremation for well over 1,000 years. Then Europe became what they call post-Christian Europe. It's now the most secular continent on the planet. Right? Churches are empty largely, and cremation rates have skyrocketed. It's now the norm in most of Europe. Even here in the States, by the way. If you compare the quote-unquote Bible Belt to the quote-unquote secular coasts, I don't like that terminology, but that's how people refer to it, so that, you'll find far higher burial rates in the Bible Belt and far higher cremation rates on the coast. There's a lot of literature as to why this is. Why is it that people who profess belief in one God, monotheists, right? Why do they tend to bury at far higher rates? A lot of explanations. I'll share with you my theory. My theory is very simple. The beginning of the Bible, beginning of the Torah says that every human being is created in the image of God. Tselem Elokim. You don't mess with that image, right? That doesn't mean that God has an image. No, God is not physical, but somehow our body is something special. There's something holy. There's a spark in us. And when something is special, when something is holy, you treat it respectfully. Anybody remember Hurricane Katrina? I think it's 2005 or 6 or something like that. Wiped out much of Louisiana and the whole Gulf Coast, the whole area. So I don't know if you remember this, but there was a big news item. A couple weeks later, there was a ceremony. A bunch of the shuls in New Orleans had been drowned, covered in water, and the Torah scrolls, the Sefer Torah, were damaged beyond repair. Now, Torah scrolls can be repaired and are regularly repaired, right? The ink chips off, something goes wrong, you take it to a sofer, take it to a scribe, and they can fix it. But what do you do with a Torah scroll that cannot be fixed? What did they do after Hurricane Katrina? It was on front page New York Times, it was news, burial. Right? There's every cemetery that I know of, Jewish cemetery, usually has a place for the religious writings, for the hidden writings, for the parchments, for the Sefer Torah, right? Torah scroll is our holiest object, and we bury it. Now, take this hypothetical example. Rabbi, don't take any offense, it's only hypothetical. God forbid there is a fire in the synagogue, and you are passing by, and you want to go in and be a hero and save the Torah scrolls, the holiest objects we have. Are you allowed to risk your life to save the Torah scroll? Well, the answer is absolutely not. If the firemen tell you that there's no risk now, we've taken just a little smoke, but you want to go and get your scrolls, buddy, go and get them. Yes, go and save them from the water. Absolutely. But if there is any risk to your life, Judaism says you're not allowed to risk your life to save the Torah scroll. Because as holy as a Torah scroll is, you are holier. And it doesn't matter if you're a man or you're a woman, if you're old or you're young, if you are healthy or sick, if you are very observant or not observant at all, you are holier than a Torah scroll. We bury Torah scrolls because they're holy. We bury human beings. That is, I believe, why monotheists traditionally, instinctively, intuitively know that they should be burying. By the way, simple example of this. When you were 8 years old and your pet dog, Spot, died, I can virtually guarantee that your mother did not say, okay, honey, you bring over Spot, I'll fire up the barbecue. What'd you do with Spot? You buried Spot. Because we bury treasure, we bury things that are important to us, and we burn the garbage. In Judaism, fire is not a cleanser. Fire destroys. What is purifying? Water. That's the mikvah. You wash your hands at the Passover Seder. Mikvah, it's alive, right? Fire destroys. We don't destroy God's image. A few other ideas, and then I want to get to your questions and comments. Like this. Raise your hand if you have ever visited a Jewish monastery or a Jewish convent. There's a trick question. I know you haven't. Why haven't you ever visited a Jewish monastery, a Jewish convent? Because there aren't any. Now ask yourself the question, why aren't there any? There's roughly, 1.5 billion Christians in the world. Most of those denominations, Catholicism, the biggest one, a lot of them have priests and nuns, right? That are celibate, abstinent, right? You have monasteries, convents. The Eastern mystics have it, right? There's tons of Buddhist and other religions. If you were to ask a Catholic who's the holiest person on the planet, they'll probably say the Pope. Doesn't get married, avoids physical enjoyment in many ways. Same, the Dalai Lama in the East, same thing. Well, you think these people are stupid? They're not stupid. They're intelligent people. There's billions of them. It's a philosophy. It's a philosophy that we should understand. It's a philosophy that we fundamentally disagree with. But let's understand it. They believe that if you want to be spiritual, you want to reach up to spirituality, to God, you have to deny the physical. The physical is bad. It's a block. It's evil. It's either or. This is why the truly spiritual people in their religions avoid all physicality. Don't get married, don't have kids, no intimacy. What does Judaism say about the physical world? We say God is a good God that created a good physical world. And you have to be like the rider on the horse. You can't just like, eat all day and, whatever. But the point is, physicality is good. And you should, hopefully, meet the right person, have a beautiful physical life. On Shabbat, we have great food. The physical is good. It has to be managed, but it's good. The point being, no wonder that some people are very open to destroying the body. Because fundamentally, philosophically, religiously, they see the body as bad. So get rid of it. We see the body as good. Because my soul, my being, could not accomplish anything in this world without my body. I couldn't give charity without my hand. I couldn't give a hug to a person. I couldn't do anything. The body and the soul are partners in Judaism. And partners respect each other and treat each other with respect. I'll even go further. Imagine you have a woman that, God forbid, she loses her husband of many, many years. It's the day of the funeral. She comes back from the cemetery, takes off her black dress, takes a shower, puts on her red party dress, high heels, makeup, goes out that very night to a bar looking for a new guy. Sound normal to you? When you're a partner with someone, you don't just move on that quickly, right? The body and the soul are partners. The soul does not leave its body immediately. According to tradition, there are mystical sources. In the 7 days of Shiva, the soul is going back and forth between its body that it's connected to and the home where the people that are mourners are sitting Shiva to hear what's being said about it. Slowly but surely, the 30 days, Shloshim, the year of Kadesh, right, the 11 months, the soul is going up to heaven, but it's always connected to that body. The soul and the body are partners. We therefore treat the body with respect and love. Have you ever seen at a, God forbid, if somebody passes and you go to a Jewish funeral, that they tear kriya? Have you heard this thing? Everybody's seen this? So I don't know what's the norm here in Boulder. I will say that in the last 10, 15 years, I've noticed a change. That, by the way, tearing kriya means to tear. It's like a double version, like English, Yiddish, Hebrew, whatever. Tearing kriya, tearing a tear, right? So I've noticed that a lot of places, I assume it's the same here, but it's certainly like this in the Northeast, that a lot of funeral homes, Jewish funeral homes, what they'll do is at the cemetery, they will provide a ribbon for the mourners, sometimes a black tie for the gentleman and a ribbon for the lady, and they'll then be cut as the kriya, right? I'm not criticizing. The intention is obviously beautiful and very good. But just to share information, right? The whole point of tearing kriya is not that someone gives me a ribbon and it is torn. The whole point of that tradition, which we know of for thousands of years, this is not a new Jewish tradition, this is an ancient Jewish tradition. The whole point is, it's my garment, it's my clothing, part of me is torn. I don't want an artificial ribbon, it's part of me. For a gentleman, it's a jacket, for a lady, it's usually outer robe, whatever it's going to be. And during Shiva, the person is sitting with a torn robe. I am torn. I am wounded. This is not okay. This is not okay. This is not normal. So imagine this. When a person dies, the earth itself, planet Earth, tears kriya. A tear is opened up in the fabric of the earth. There is a hole there. It is ugly. It is uncomfortable. It speaks of pain. But then, lovingly, calmly, the body is placed into the grave. Community, family puts the earth on top. Healing begins. But there is always a gravestone. There is always a scar. The person is never forgotten. The earth itself tears kriya. There are two attitudes that I find in the modern world that people deal with in terms of the discomfort of death. At first, these two attitudes sound like they're polar opposites, but I believe that when you get down to the core of it, I believe they're actually very similar. Like this. Some people don't like the idea of death, so they want to slow it down, fight it as much as possible. What does that mean? Metal caskets, slow it down a little bit. Embalming, slow it down a little bit. Above ground mausoleums, slow it down a little bit. The body will still decompose, but I'm going to fight it with everything I can. I don't like this death thing. I'm going to fight it and slow it down. There's the opposite end of the spectrum that I'm really uncomfortable with this death thing, and I want to get it over with as soon as possible. So that is cremation instead of burial. That is, let's not do 7 days, let's do 3 days or 1 day, or a quick memorial service. Let's get this. Thomas Lynch, who's a poet undertaker from Michigan, actually prize-winning poet who's an undertaker, he called this the toilet assumption. What's a toilet assumption? Forgive me, but it's important. Things that are unpleasant we want to flush and get rid of. Let's just get it over with. So these two attitudes, some people want to slow the process down, some people want to speed the process up. They're opposites, but they're really the same because they both come from discomfort with what is happening, and I'm going to fight it in some way. Judaism says the opposite. Jewish thought says, you've had a full life. You've built your whole life. 6 days, you improve the world. The 7th day, sit back and remember you're not in charge. Judaism teaches that the final decision in life, the final statement, I am not claiming control. I am not trying to speed things up, going against. I'm not trying to slow things down, going against. I'm accepting the way of nature. Like plants and trees, let me gently down to sleep. I think it's a very beautiful statement on a very deep level. One more idea, and then I'll open it up to you for your questions and comments. I don't know where I got this from. I think it's true, but it might be what do they call when you put things together? A composite. It might be a composite of a few different stories, I'm not sure. So I have in my mind this monologue of an older Jewish guy who calls his middle-aged kids together and says, kids, I want you to listen to me for a second. I'm being serious. I may not have been the best Jew on planet Earth. To be honest, I didn't have much of a Jewish education. I didn't really do that much. Looking back, maybe I would do things differently, maybe not, I don't know. But there's one thing I do know. I was born a Jew, and I'm proud to be a Jew. And when I die, I want to be buried as Jews have been buried for thousands of years. I want the Chevra Kadisha to prepare the body. When a baby is born in a hospital, you take the baby, you clean it, you envelop it, you wrap it. Same thing with a body, entering a new world, the afterlife. You take the body, you clean it, they wrap it. I want the rabbi to say the prayers. I want the little bit of the earth from the land of Israel. I want the Kaddish. I want the Hebrew date. I want it all. Because on my last statement on planet Earth, I want it to be, I may not have been a perfect Jew, but I'm a proud Jew, and I want the world to know that. So I don't know about you, but to me, I find that very touching. Someone once said, there are worse things than death. Have you ever spent an evening with an insurance salesman? So, there are worse things. But it's important that we actually think about it. And it's a big decision. It's our final decision, our final statement to the planet. And for all of these reasons, remember, we analyze the reasons people choose cremation. When you look into them, they're very weak or usually not true, except that it's cheaper. So why have Jews focused on it so much? Huge part of our religion, like not bagels and lox stuff. This is major, right? Monotheists choose burial. The idea that the body and soul are partners, we bury treasure, we burn garbage, right? The idea that because they're partners, the soul is connected to its body and watches over its body. And this fantastic idea of this monologue that I want to do the Jewish thing. I'm connecting to my people forever. So thank you very much. Thank you once again to our hosts for organizing this and the JCC for hosting it. I'm glad to have any questions or comments that you may have. Anyway, or if there's people, is there somebody who can read, people who are online, if they want to send in, are you online with them or something? Or? Oh, there's no comments or chat or anything? No. Do you want to give out your private phone number and they'll phone you? I'm just kidding. I should repeat the question. Okay, very good. Oh, there are mics at the table. Okay, good. Yeah. Okay, anybody, any questions or comments? Anything you want to share? Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What about that concrete giant casing? Is that required in Jewish cemeteries?
So it's a great question. Yeah, I will. I will. So Marcy, I believe, right? Marcy's asking, what about the concrete casing that you find in most graves? Not great environmentally. Okay. It is usually a municipal regulation, but very often it's not even a municipal regulation. It is done because they're afraid of the earth moving and caving in, and there being uneven, graves and dangers for people to walk and things like that. In Israel, they do use some concrete, but far less. It is not a complete casing all around. This is going in a very good direction, by the way, as green burial is becoming the norm for many people with environmentally conscious. It is having inroads and affecting mainstream burial as well, so there's less problem with the concrete. That being said, believe it or not, eventually concrete does go away. I know it takes 1,000 years. It's not like metal. It doesn't have that negative effect. It's not like embalming. It's in my humble view, I'm an amateur environmentalist. I'm a wannabe. But from what I understand, it's a relatively minor problem in the scheme of things, and the alternatives are worse. By the way, if you're open to being buried in Israel, there's an ancient Jewish tradition of being buried in Israel, and it's great, and you don't have to worry about the concrete either, or the casket. Other questions, comments, please? Yes, ma'am, and then sir, okay? Yeah.
Very quick comment on the water cremation.
Yeah. Aquamation.
Could you repeat?
I will repeat the questions, yes, I will. So the question was about the water cremations, also called aquamation. It's like 4 or 5 different forms of it. What? Hydrolysis is what I was looking to. Thank you. It's a newfangled kind of an approach. There's a few issues with it. I'll tell you a technical issue, and then I'll tell you a philosophical issue. Everything I've told you so far is really based on a lot of research from the secular world and Jewish sources, the environmental stuff. When I looked into this, I actually got the blueprints of the 8 or 10 top crematory ovens in America. I analyzed the energy use, it's tremendous actually, and the environmental output, so a lot of that. What I'm answering you now is just me speaking from what I know. I don't think there is research on this, but like this. The idea is that there's sort of a big, I don't know what you call it, a tube that they put the body in, water and some alkaline, some acids basically, and it breaks the body down, in a matter of hours instead of in a matter of months naturally. The idea is that it is better for the environment, okay? The first thing is, to my knowledge, and I check pretty regularly, I might be wrong, but to my knowledge, there is no independent environmental review that actually supports that it's better for the environment. The companies that are making money off it claim it is. That was the same thing that was said by cremation companies, which is definitely not true, right? Second thing, that's a technical, issue. The other technical issue is that it's against Jewish law because it is actively you're destroying the body, you're breaking down the body. Water doesn't just do it on its own, right? There's a pressure, it's water pressure, right, which is heat, right, and acids. Even taking a step back, and this is just me thinking out loud with you, because I think it's a great question. I have this question this is my first speaking tour since COVID really, and almost every time I've spoken on cremation, I get your question. It's a new thing that you hear about in the news. So like this, remember I talked about the 2 different attitudes that people have today in the modern world, that some want to speed it up and some want to slow it down? So I put this hydrolysis aquamation in the same idea. Is your last statement on planet Earth, I am accepting the fate of nature, God giveth, God taketh away, earth to earth, ashes to ashes? Or is it, I'm going to go technological, I'm going to go fancy, I'm going to go control, I'm going to prove that I can? It feels wrong to me. So technically I believe it's against, but also why not just do what everybody has done for thousands of years and what your whole tradition emphasizes and what the birds and the plants and the trees and the animals do in nature? Lay me simply down to rest. That's my philosophical answer. Sir, you had a question.
Hi, my name is Rabbi Yaakov Gabriel.
Shalom.
Nice to see you. And thank you for coming so far.
Pleasure.
And thank you for the wonderful things you taught me.
Pleasure.
And I find that what you're saying is under ideal conditions. It's like in Talmudic terms, there's like l'chatchila and b'diavad. You know what I'm talking about. There's like a situation that's like ideal, and then the situation of like facts on the ground. Facts on the ground. So my question is, Doron, let's say you're given a fait accompli. Somebody shows up and says, I did the cremation of my parents. My question to you, it's a two-part question, okay? But the first part is, are you willing at that point to bury the ashes? That's a fait accompli. You're handed the ashes. Okay. It's not a choice anymore. Second thing is a little bit more abstract, and that is, we just finished the 10 commitments, all right? The 10 big ones. And I'm curious why you think, make you think a little bit too, why you think the cremation was not included in the top 10 of things that needed to be talked about.
Two fascinating questions. I'll repeat them. The first one is basically that, okay, what about facts on the ground? You can talk ideals, but what if somebody's already cremated? For example, can you bury those cremated remains? Isn't that better than nothing, so to speak? That's the first question. The second question was, why wasn't cremation in the Ten Commandments? Okay, so Rav Sadia Gaon, I'm answering the second question first. Rav Sadia Gaon, the famous philosopher, rabbi from just over 1,000 years ago, explained how all of the Torah is hidden in the Ten Commandments, and outlined each one actually. So I believe that the burial and cremation is within the Tselem Elokim, the idea of that, which is not the Ten Commandments, but it's the basis of Judaism, meaning that it is very fundamental. That's why it's all over the Torah. Abraham buried Sarah, he bought Hebron, for her. It's when you just read the Bible, it's clear how major it is. So why something is technically in the 10 or one of the 10 or a spin-off or whatever, but it's pretty major. That second question doesn't really bother me so much, to be honest, just because it is such a major factor in Judaism once you look at it. The first question is a fascinating question. What? So I'm saying the commandment of burial is at the end of Deuteronomy. It's not one of the top 10, so to speak, the 10 commitments, the 10 commandments. But I'm pointing out that burial is so present in the Torah so often that I don't know, if it's a question that why was it not? There's many things that are not. Yom Kippur is not in the 10 commandments. It's pretty important. Passover is not in the 10 commandments. Pretty important, right? There's a lot of important things that are not in the Ten Commandments. There's a whole ideology there. So that's a technical question because it's so present. The first question you asked is a fascinating question. And I want to share with you a historical reality, a debate from the 1890s in London, England. Cremation is not a new thing. Cremation has gone through ups and downs throughout history. And in the 1890s, somebody created this new oven that was more effective or whatever it was, and cremation started being a thing again in London, England, even amongst the Jewish community. And people wanted to bury cremated remains in the Jewish cemetery. And the rabbis of London at the time, the rabbinic establishment, the Vaad, the Beit Din, made a takana, a decision, declaration, something that one was not allowed to bury cremated remains in a Jewish cemetery. Completely forbid it. Now, if you understand Jewish law and you understand a little bit of chemistry, that was a shocking decision. Because, get this, a Kohen, a Jewish priest, right? Fathers, serve in the temple, whatever, has to avoid death, right? On Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, in Jerusalem and the temple, the holiest place, right? The holiest person, so to speak, was supposed to be, would go to the mikveh 5 times. The high priest, the Kohen Gadol, will go to the mikveh 5 times on Yom Kippur, right? Why? Because he's connecting to life, connecting to God is life, and you have to separate yourself from death, right? That's why, a woman goes to the mikveh, right, after having a period, because it's a potential loss of potential life, right? And this is what Hasidim go, every day, connecting to life, right? So Kohanim, the priests, are supposed to be connected to life and avoid death. They're not allowed to go into a cemetery Famous rule, a Kohen doesn't go into a cemetery. There's a couple of exceptions, immediate mourners, okay. Hand a Kohen an urn of cremated remains, no problem in Jewish law whatsoever. Carry them, hold them, do whatever you want with them. Why? Because it's not the person. Get this. Take a seed, put it in the ground. What happens? Plant grows. Take a seed, burn it, then put that burnt seed into the ground. Nothing grows. There is no DNA left on cremated remains. Fascinating scientific fact, undeniable. They're burnt at such a high temperature. You can't. I've talked to forensics experts. They don't like cremation because they want the option of a few years later, they want to dig it up and find DNA. They can't. There's nothing there. You can't tell two different cremated remains. So why did the rabbis in London say you can't bury cremated remains in a cemetery? What, you can take dirt from across the road and put it in the cemetery. It's just dirt. It means nothing. It's irrelevant. Medically, scientifically, and Jewishly, there's no, it's just burnt dirt. It means nothing. So why can't you bury it in a cemetery? And the answer was, they knew the law very well. They knew it better than we do. They knew it's irrelevant. And they knew that it was a signal. And that if we start allowing people to bury cremated remains in Jewish cemeteries, although we think we are doing something nice and our intentions are good, at least they'll feel connected, etc., etc., but you are setting up that the next generation is going to start thinking that cremation is really okay, and it's not a big deal. So there are many Jewish cemeteries today that do accept cremated remains. I understand why. They're thinking, well, I want the person to stay connected to the Jewish community. They already did it. It's post facto, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, one could make a case that it's very short-term thinking, and that it was this very acceptance of post facto scenarios, like you mentioned, is what engendered the fact that 40% of American Jewish dead are now being cremated because, it's still Jewish. No offense. Everybody does what they know. People are good. If you chose cremation for your parents, for your loved ones, if they chose cremation, you followed their wishes, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. Not at all. What are you talking about? We make the best decisions we know based on the information we have. So what do you do now, post facto? Right? I suggest you make a donation to a local synagogue, Chabad of Boulder. He didn't ask me to say that. In the person's memory. Jews are about life. We're about moving on, right? So, and maybe make a different decision for yourself. It's not about guilt. It's not about bad. We all do things. Okay, God will take care of stuff. Don't worry about it. But in the future, make the good decisions. So that's how I would answer the cremated remains question.
Thank you. And the last thing I just want to say, underneath all this question, was the fact that my family mostly died in the Holocaust. And I was born in the DP camp.
Which one?
In Santa Maria, in Italy.
Yeah.
Santa Maria.
So I want to tell you, I have met a number of Holocaust survivors. The last people that I ever assumed would choose cremation. When I was growing up, this was the reason that people gave not to cremate. Hitler didn't just kill our bodies, he also didn't give them a proper Jewish burial. It was like a double slap, so to speak, or much worse than that. And it was just not a Jewish thing to do. The Nazis did it, we're not gonna do it, right? So I was shocked the first time that I met Holocaust survivors who chose cremation. But I've met up with it numerous times. And the reason that they give, and obviously, there's no judgment on a Holocaust survivor, but we have to understand where they're coming from. Doesn't mean that it's a good or a bad decision. I'm just saying understand it respectfully. What I've heard from several of them is, listen, this happened to my family. My family was burnt in Auschwitz, and I want to be with them. It happened to them, it'll happen to me, and God will take care of them, and God will take care of me, right? So again, there's nothing I can say or should say to a Holocaust survivor. I don't go there, right? But just for us to understand, since you mentioned the Holocaust. Like this. The rabbi is probably sitting there wondering, I invite this guy to come speak from Israel on burial and cremation. He takes 45 minutes or an hour, how long we've been here, and he still hasn't mentioned the number one reason why our tradition encourages burial. Notice that, Rabbi? Thank you. I wasn't fishing for compliments. But do you know that we've been together for roughly an hour, I have not mentioned once the main reason the Talmud gives for burial. On purpose, by the way, I don't mention it. Because it sounds weird. The resurrection of the dead. When I heard about resurrection of the dead growing up, it always sounded weird to me. Do you remember the first major music video, MTV, I think it's 1977 or 78, Michael Jackson's Thriller? Thriller, remember the zombies are coming out? Every time I'm on a plane, there's like zombie movies left, right, and center now. Like, the dead coming back to life just seems nuts, right? So there's many Jewish concepts that if you get down to the core concept of what Judaism actually taught, it is a beautiful, true idea. Just that we've been introduced to the idea either through Hollywood or through Christianity or whatever, and it just seems weird. Resurrection of the Dead certainly seems weird if you've seen zombie movies, right? What's the idea? The idea is like this. Anybody remember Dolly, the sheep? The first cloned sheep? Over 30 years ago. Today, cloning is science. It is not science fiction. There are Hollywood celebrities today that have cloned their pets, so whenever they go in their different houses around the world, their pet is there. Seriously, Google it. Okay? Cloning today is a fact. It is not science fiction. You can take DNA, you can create a whole body, it's there. The only thing holding it back is moral. We don't know, once we start doing this on people, how far does it go? You're going to grow bodies for organs. It gets really weird, so there's rules about it. But scientifically, it's not a problem. Voltaire once said, "It is no more of a miracle to be born twice than born once." Fascinating. If you ever saw one of those Jurassic Park movies, right, where they take like the dinosaur DNA and they recreate dinosaurs, no scientist on planet Earth today will say that that's impossible. I'm serious. It is fully, we can't do it as well as that yet. But we can already do living animals, and we already do DNA. It's just a question, they'll get better and better. The point is, the Talmud says that there is a bone in the human body that never disintegrates. It is called the Luz bone, L-U-Z in English. Some believe it's over here. Some believe it's down at the coccyx. How do you say that? Coccyx over there, right? Funny thing is, if you ask a forensics expert or exhume a body, you won't find a bone. You won't. It's like, when they do this amongst, So what does the Talmud mean? I believe what it means. Bone just means like the smallest physical thing. It means DNA. Meaning if you bury a person, the DNA lasts. It is there. And even on pure scientific grounds, that person can come back. Remember we said how the body and the soul are partners? So that the body is important and it has some role in the future. Don't ask me what it is, I don't know. But it's important. The body, we don't ignore the body. It's not over. So that DNA come back. So what the Talmud is saying is that people who actively, and this is my direct answer to your very good question, what the Talmud is saying is that people who directly deny resurrection of the dead can't benefit from it. I mean, that's people who knowingly, in their times, knew the rules. Victims of the Holocaust, all the rabbinic authorities are very clear. They had no choice in this, and God will bring them back. And I humbly suggest, and I've asked this to Rabbi Zone, who some of you mentioned, who is on the Chevra Gedish in Queens, and he agreed with me, or I agreed with him, that someone who chooses cremation, let's say they're Jewish and they're born in India, never knew they were Jewish, never knew there was an option, and is cremated it's not their fault, and God will take care of it. But that's different than someone who is knowingly choosing. So in terms of the survivors of the Holocaust, again, I don't know how I could or should I ever say anything directly, but my feeling is that your ancestors, your loved ones that were murdered, what they wanted most in their last moments, what they wanted most of all was to have a proper Jewish burial. And the last thing they would want is for you to choose what they were done against their will. Right? But again, in Holocaust survivor, you have to be very careful what you say. Any final questions, comments? Yes, sir.
How is your message received when you talk to Jewish audiences that have chosen cremation?
Look, so it's a good question. The question was how was my message received when I talk to people who've chosen cremation? I'll tell you what I know. Some I don't know what happens when they go home, but I do know that most of the places. That I've spoken at invite me back a few years later for a new crowd. So that's a good sign. There must not have been too many complaints. More seriously, I think that, we grew up with this idea of like Jewish guilt. The funny thing is, like, Judaism is not about guilt at all. It's not a Jewish concept. Somehow it filtered into our culture, but it's not supposed to be there in the way that it is at all. And so I think people appreciate that. Listen, my message that I said before, and I'll repeat now for you, was that don't beat yourself up about the past. What was done was done. You did the best you could. Make a donation in the person's name and make a different decision in the future. And that's it. Yom Kippur once a year, say, okay, I'm sorry. That's it. We don't focus on the past. So I think when people hear that message, I think that they accept it. And you say, look, we're all affected by the world around us. I mean, we're living in the modern world, and people are affected by what's going on, and there's fads, and there's, culture, and there's television, and movies, and things just become, normal. And things become normative and becomes normalized. So it's not a blame game. It's just, okay, but maybe you can know a little more and make a different decision in the future. So I think that's kind of the reaction. Any final questions, comments? Yes, sir.
I'm just wondering, what does Judaism think what happens after death?
Wow. The question is, what does Judaism think, and what do I think about what happens after we die? It is a huge subject. I will tell you that I don't know. We don't focus on it too much because we're supposed to improve the world and improve our own lives and bring more spirituality into the world and make this world a proper place for God. But we very much believe that not only does the soul go on, but the body goes on in some form. The Greeks brought the idea into focus, which many of us have been influenced by in the West, that the soul is immortal, right? And the body crumbles and is over, which is why I don't care what happens to it, cremate it, hydrolyze it, whatever, Judaism actually doesn't say that. It says that, yes, the soul is immortal, but the body also has a role to play. That's the resurrection of the dead that we talked about. That's the basic idea, please talk to the rabbi for more information on it, but the basic idea, as I understand it, is that every soul has a tikkun to do, a fixing to do. We sometimes think of this in external examples of tikkun olam, which the Jewish world has hopped on as an important thing, and it is, but it's actually a misunderstanding of the concept. Tikkun olam is not just helping the poor. That's the external version of it, which is important. I mean, it's all over the Torah. But the main tikkun, the main fixing, l'taken means to fix, even in modern Israel, right, is internally. If I'm angry, to get rid of my anger. If my heart is blocked, to open it up. Like, I'm here to fix myself and fix the world. So that's the main answer that I would give you. It all depends on the person. If the person has finished their job, they're going up and living with God, whatever that means. If the person has not finished their job, they come back to get another chance to fix it. Yeah, that's what I understand. Yes?
I don't know if you would agree, but maybe you would recommend reading Simcha Raphael.
Somewhat?
Read Simcha Raphael.
I don't know who that is, but she has a book list. Oh, very interesting. There's recommended books. So I'm sure talk to the rabbi and he'll have more for you. Okay, ladies and gents, we're going to call it a day. Thank you so much for coming, participating. Thank you for hosting. For anyone who has further questions, anything pops up, your main address, of course, is the Shiners. They're here, and you talk to them. If there's anything on this particular subject, I suggest a website called peacefulreturn.org. Peacefulreturn.org has a lot of information, my own stuff and other people's stuff. Of course, Chabad.org is like the greatest Jewish repository of everything, and tons of people speaking on it. And if there's something personal for me, I'm not good on the phone, but I do answer emails. My email is my name, Doron Kornbluth, you got it from the invitation, you'll see the name there, at gmail.com. I'm glad to follow up. Thank you. Sure.
Wow, I'm blown away. I thought I knew something about this subject, but I guess I don't. But I do want to say that we have a couple more minutes for a social, just to talk, and there's some delicious sushi or some cake, some pastries. What I want to do is, Mike Greenwood, can you stand up? So Mike is from one of the sponsors, and he's from Greenwood and Myers. Rebecca Steele is also here, and she should be coming back. But anyway, Mike is gonna, you want to go to one of the small tables? Also, Evie Cohn is here from Chevra Kadisha, and Joe Friedman, right? From the Chevra Kadisha. So there, if you want to come to be like one of the round tables there, you can come speak to Joe or Evie. And I think Rebecca, she said she's still coming back. She had some emergency. She just took a phone call. But please come take some coffee, some pastries, some sushi, and just, if you feel like mulling around a little, discussing some of this. Also, Doron should be, I don't know if he's out, he should still be here. If you have any questions and you want to, speak while he's still here. In any case, thank you for coming. And I just want to tell you that while it is a little brave, like I said, for us to start this discussion, I think that it behooves us, and I'm talking about myself as well, behooves us to really take this seriously, start the discussion, and maybe make some concrete decisions in whatever way, just because the worst thing is that we'll just go home and get back to our life, and it's not a fun subject to discuss. But I could tell you, and I've seen so many families, and I know that there was a different program like this in the community. One of the rabbis had said, the worst thing is when the family, if we are clueless, if we're just not sure, we're ambivalent, maybe like this, maybe like that, it's really not fair to leave things not taken care of and not organized and not discussing it with our families and putting it in writing, because our family really doesn't know what we want. And this is so important that even if it's uncomfortable, once we we cross our T's, put our affairs in order, then God willing, we're gonna live for a long life. It's not catchy just by discussing the subject. So I hope I'm not too pushy, but I really believe this and I really care. And in any case, thank you for coming out, and I hope you'll be schmoozing a little before we're over. Thank you.